This is a pretty important subject, let's say. I'm not a PhD. I'm not a doctor. I am a researcher. And what I mean by that is I'm a forensic researcher. So I read a lot. But I don't have the mechanisms to publish like a normal PhD would. So when I discover new things or have new thoughts or think that I'm really onto something, and again, if you're a research professional or a lettered, professional watching this, I reference everything that I do. So I substantiate, my thoughts and kind of where I go. But I don't really have a mechanism to publish. And so this is my mechanism. So this is a pretty important subject that I'm going to be dealing with today. This is weighty, let's just say that. So, if you're out there kind of in normal human world listening, this is important stuff. If you're a PhD or an MD, then I would listen with great interest. Again, I try to take these concepts and make them interpretable to everyone. But certainly that doesn't take away from the weight of the concept. So here we go. So let's talk a little bit about something that I call the bacterial hijack. You're going to hear a lot about the bacterial hijack from me over the coming years and all that. So let's dive right into it. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about just systems of medicine, and I think we're sort of leaving one system behind, and a new system is emerging. And I don't mean to offend anyone by this, and I don't mean to lampoon anyone with this either. But we're kind of right now we're moving away from, let's say, this system of a man-made, medical system where, and again, there's been great strides made there. If I get shot or, trauma and acute care, there's no one that does it better right now, than pharma and the pharma system. But that doesn't mean that that applies everywhere, and that doesn't mean that that applies to all situations. And we've all kind of have this, or at least I grew up with this one pill fixes all mentality. If something's wrong with me, I go to the doctor's going to give me a pill, and then I'll get better, right? But I think that we're seeing the veil kind of get ripped off that system, and it's definitely a profit driven system. It's definitely a profits over patients. I think we've seen that over the last few years. It's institutional, meaning it's hard to change. It's kind of worships, let's say, man over God. It doesn't really consider the cause of disease, because if you consider the cause of disease, you kind of hurt the business model, right? It's definitely flawed. It makes mistakes. Again, I think if you're not seeing that already, I think you will in the coming years about some mistakes that have been made over the last 4 or 5 years, let's say. And it doesn't really honor man. I mean, it kind of humiliates us, doesn't it? If you've ever been through any kind of a surgery or pharma situation, it's just, you're stripped of all your dignity by the time you're done with that. So, what is God's system? Well, God has built, and this is what I want to talk about, because we're going to talk about this bacterial hijack, but the way that you get past this bacterial hijack is by understanding God's natural system of medicine. And what does that mean? Well, it expresses through nature. It requires an understanding of how you work. And in our current situation, boy, that's almost like occulted from us. I'm not going to teach you about how you work because it breaks the business model. God's system really it relies on the healing power of the sun. It gets at the core of disease, which, again, you're going to may or may not argue with me about this one, but hopefully by the end of this, you'll at least understand what I'm talking about. So it gets at the core, the cause of disease, which is possession. In every religion, there's this notion of possession. Well, what does that mean? Well, again, we're going to talk about this in a very scientific and pharmacological way, but I think by the end of this, you'll understand at least why I think what I think. And God's system honors man, really, and nature, right? So it really elevates man and nature as the healing forces, and, And it's definitely not a one pill thing. It's a system. So you have to kind of understand how you work and how God works and how God expresses, and then blow with the wind rather than fight the wind. So I want to sort of start this with those thoughts. I know that's a little far afield from what we came here for, but we'll get there. So inside of us, this is something that I think is just logical and obvious, but every cell, every single cell inside of you is always striving toward perfect. There's not one cell in you that's made it as, just sort of is built to destroy itself or built to mutate or built to screw up, right? Every single cell inside of ourselves is always striving toward perfect. If something happens to it, if it goes bad, if it gets traumatized, infected, it will divide, and that new version of itself will always be striving toward perfect. And you have a process that will come along and get rid of the trash, as long as you have that process on, which we'll talk about in a second. But every cell inside of you is always striving toward perfect, okay? Well, why do we break? Why do we become diseased? Why do cells look like they do down at the bottom? That's, cancerous cells. So why does this happen? And why do we become sick? Why do cells not always strive toward perfect? Well, it takes something. It takes an insult. It takes a, trauma. It might be an acute injury. You might have a gunshot wound or something like that, right? That might cause cells to dysfunction. But for the majority of us, and again, I'm going to call everything bacteria. So virus, fungus, granules, granulocytes, all that stuff, I'm going to just call bacteria, because the pathology is roughly the same as a kind of what happens here. Again, viruses are burned through you quicker, and they like to move around, and that's how they sort of, then they mutate inside of you or whatever. A bacteria will stick with you longer. A fungus will develop and stick with you longer. So yeah, we know all that, but let's just, for argument's purposes, let's call all of that bacteria. So in order to, hijack you, in order for bacteria to take hold inside of us, in order for us to get sick, they have to do certain things, right? And again, in my mind, this bacteria, this is the cause of most disease. This is, at the core of almost everything. Certainly looking to be at the core of most cancers. You want to argue with me? Great. HPV, core of cervical cancer. H. pylori, core of stomach cancer, and gastric ulcers and gastritis and all that. We could go on and on and on, but it takes an insult, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll be convinced of that. But anyway, how do these bacteria do it? How do they hijack us? Well, they have to get control of our plane, which is cells inside of our body. And this requires disrupting, the normal flow of things. They have to keep in control of the plane or the cells. Once they sort of get inside, they have to develop a defensive strategy. They need to eat, they need to stay alive, and they need to complete their task of taking over. And then, if you further that, they need to reproduce, they need to move around, they need to expand. They might want to take over another plane or another plane or another plane, right? So bacteria have to invade a cell and change its defenses. Bacteria have to take control of a microsystem in order to evade your immune response. And that microsystem might start off being a cell or a cell lining, and then it will expand outward. But they have to take control of that and control that microenvironment through your immune response and a bunch of other stuff, or you'll just kill them. You've got lots of ways to kill bacteria. Again, they have to work pretty hard to be able to defend themselves and build a little fort. They have to alter the metabolism of the cell. They have to alter your immune response. They have to consume resources. They got to eat something to stay alive. And they've got to reproduce to expand their territory. So let's explore this. So I believe this is new. Again, you can sort of find information like this, but I don't think anybody's ever presented all this together in one look before as a, let's say, scientific argument. But anyway, the first thing that has to happen is the attachment. So these bacteria have to attach to us. And we'll sort of use H. pylori as a good example, but they all kind of work in the same way. So in order to do that, they have to sort of hit some structure inside of you. So again, they're going to be in interstitial fluid. They're going to be in lymph and blood. You might have eaten them, so they might be coming through your stomach, and they might be in your stomach system. But in order for them to sort of interface with you, they have to attach. And in order to do that, it's usually through a lining, a cellular lining. Pylori, it's through your stomach lining. And so they have to attach and they have to interface in some way. The way that they do that is through a phospholipase process. So when you need resources from cell walls and stuff, you pull those resources from cell walls and you use a process called phospholipase to break apart that sort of structure and pull out useful ingredients like fats and amino acids and things. Well, fats mainly, and phospholipase and glucose. But anyway, so they use this phospholipase process. It's actually a specific process called 2A, and that's how they interface with a cell wall, and they literally fuse with a lining. So like with pylori, it's the stomach lining, but with, in other situations in other cells, it's other ways, but it's always through 2A, or looking to be mainly through 2A. All right, so they fuse, but now that they're fused with some cell linings and stuff, and now that they can sort of, let's say, attach and sort of set up a forward base, now they need to kind of break in. And how do they break in? Well, they break in through these ways that our cells have to basically be able to sense them. And so we have cellular mechanisms to be able to understand when we're infected with bacteria. And these things are called toll-like receptors, and they work for different, so some are more sensitive to bacteria, some are more sensitive to molds, to funguses, but they all are sensitive to the signaling mechanisms of whatever bug that is. But TLR4 is a big one, okay? So our immune system, we have these receptors that are toll-like receptors. These receptors are used to sense bacterial invaders and make changes in our immune system to handle different types of invaders. So again, your reaction to a fungus might be a little bit different than your reaction to an H. pylori or a staph or strep or E. coli or whatever. But it's all sensed through these toll-like receptors. Bacteria alter, they literally change the genetic expression of TLR4 and invade the cell at TLR4 by using lipopolysaccharide or other these small molecule signaling mechanisms they have that hit other TLRs, but mainly it's TLR4 through lipopolysaccharide, and LPS alters TLR4. Okay, so then basically they need to, so now they've sort of altered, and they can alter immune cells through TLR4. They can alter stem cells through TLR4. So it's pretty significant. But they start off and they do this in a little micro system. So they sort of control their system and their environment, starting by that cellular attachment through PLA2. But then they start controlling their microenvironment and expanding their microenvironment and proliferating. One of the mechanisms of proliferation that they use, and it's arguable, and this is really neat, it's a great area for research, if you're a young, bright mind out there, but it's arguable whether this is a proliferation strategy. So like if LPS is used to metastasize and to move around, or like seeds, I guess is the best way to say it, or if LPS just is a sort of a strategy to cause you to inflame, and when you chronically inflame, you're not worried about my little micro fort down here that I can continue to build. So that's still arguable as to the strategy basically of why these bugs use LPS, but they all use LPS and it works. It works very well. But is it seeds, or is it, protect my fort, cause enough noise and confusion over here to where, you're not going to sort of invade my fort? That's still arguable. That still needs to be proved. So I pulled the bottom graphic. There is LPS. That's what it looks like. You can see its structure there over on the far right. So it's amino acids fused with fat, which is kind of interesting. It's got some sugar there on the side, the, OHs and acidic or ability to cleave those off and make an environment more acidic or more alkaline, which is kind of cool. So there's a lot right there in that little LPS. Does LPS cause cancer? So I'm just reading from this study here, a link on this information. But in addition to the risk of sepsis, recent research has revealed that immune activation by LPS, and LPS causes chronic inflammation, can also be detrimental in cancer. This is because the TLR4 receptor plays a key role in enabling cancer cells to grow and metastasize. So again, here we are right back to TLR4, to LPS, to how things grow and how things proliferate. But I don't think LPS is a seed. I think it's more a strategy, it's sort of a distraction strategy. And LPS, you can see, the nice thing about like some of these new technologies like thermal imaging is I can pretty much, in your lymphatic system at least, I can see if you're chronically inflamed or infected. I can see if you have LPS. What does that look like? Like everyone I see, frankly. But you can see, your lymphatic areas are in your inner thighs, between your arms, between your breasts, underneath your breasts for females. For males, more upper chest area. Again, in the nooks of your arms, in your fingernails, in your belly button. So look at how, and white is hot, but again, I think very obviously you can see how hot these people are. You should be one constant temperature. Your body always wants to maintain a constant body temperature. So these people all should basically be the same color, with a little bit of a sort of lessening of body temperature out to your extremities. Yeah, this is what everybody looks like, okay? So everybody has this heat in their lymphatic system. This is LPS. This is chronic inflammation. This means that these people have a bacterial infection that's very active and chronic. Okay, so the bacteria then, how else do they defend themselves? Well, LPS is a pretty interesting thing, and it also arguably mutates TLR4. It certainly influences TLR4, and TLR4 is absolutely involved in this pathology. TLR4 sort of loses its function, through this bacterial hijack. So likely it's altered. But LPS also mutates a protein called P53. Now, P53 is your main cancer-fighting protein. It is a super important protein in how we defend ourselves and how we kind of stop a cell that's out of control. So again, every cell is always trying to be perfect. If something happens to a cell and it starts breaking, well, this is a mechanism, and P53 should stop that cell from doing what it is, cause it to divide, build another perfect self, and sort of trash off the rest. But with LPS in the bacterial hijack, LPS alters and mutates P53. Yes, and so P53, at least in the microsystem, becomes ineffective at doing its job. So again, what does this mean? Well, the bacteria are taking out our comms and they're taking out our reaction force. How in the world can we defend ourselves if our reaction force and our comms are gone? They also alter the process where we get rid of mutated cells called autophagy. So you have two ways to kill cancer natively: P53, which gets mutated, and autophagy, which gets hijacked in this process. So, well, we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so what else do these guys do? How else do they defend themselves? Well, it turns out P53 is our big circadian regulator. It is the communication point that talks to all of our clock genes and all of these circadian genes. 43%, 42% of your genes, it's arguable, it sometimes goes up to 50, But a lot of your genes, let's say a third at least of your genes, are controlled by clock. And without P53, you can't control them. Clock will tick, but won't reverberate. You won't be able to control genetic expression. And guess what they're tied to? Your immune response. So how smart of the bacteria to basically get the one thing, and we've only got one gene that will do a P53-like thing called P53, but we only have one of them. And again, they hijack that right off. So it's just like they sort of knock down all of these defensive mechanisms that we have in order to get them. Thank goodness this is micro, not macro, but it can become macro, and we'll, again, talk about that in a second. But P53 controls our circadian gene expression, so about 42% of our genes. P53 controls genes that are immune-related and that express by circadian rhythms, and TLR9 is a big one, and he is a big-time circadian guy. By controlling the circadian expression of, so LPS, I can jack with TLR4, but in order to move around and proliferate, I need to get TLR9. So I just wait for him to go to sleep. Again, I shut down the genes that are associated with expressing him, and I just kind of wait for him to go to sleep anyway, and then I can move around. Yeah. By controlling the circadian expression of genes, bacteria can create opportunistic timing to reproduce and grow. But that's what I just said. Basically, they understand your circadian. They know it's knocked down. They know that you can't get them at certain times, and even more so, it's knocked down anyway, and they use those times to move around. By controlling the expression of genes, bacteria can downregulate immune mediators that would otherwise kill them. Yeah. All right, the defense 3. So what else do they do, the little buggers? Well, they also invade stem cells, and they do this at TLR4. They alter, basically, our ability for stem cells to differentiate into M2 macrophages. Yeah. So if you're always polarized as M1, then, again, I just need one strategy to kind of defend myself against. And what does M1 versus M2 mean? M1 is killer stuff, immediate killer cells that go out and try to kill things. M2 is more your antibody defense. So again, if I can force everything to M1 and put up my defenses there, and again, I only need one set of defenses. I don't have to even worry about M2 in my microenvironment. And guess what? This is exactly what happens. And this is why in very severe like cancers and like leukemias and things like that, this is exactly what's happened. All of the stem cells have been sort of jumped and they're set. I mean, you can't change them, and you can't change that immune response unless you have a stem cell transplant. And when you have a stem cell transplant, you get new fresh stem cells. And again, they begin to change that whole situation in the bone, and they begin to rewrite that whole situation. That's a very severe thing to do, to have a stem cell transplant. It's hard on you, but again, it will change this situation. And this is the same thing that happens with metastasis in cancer. We'll kind of draw those parallels here in a second. But this is more severe as this bacterial hijack sort of gets worse and worse and worse. This is the last stage. And if it can get in and mutate basically stem cells in bones, it's game over. It's the same as metastasis with cancer. So by invading stem cells, bacteria can alter them. Bacteria force macrophages to polarize as M1. So they force them into a killer rather than a healer mode. This effectively takes away our anti-inflammatory response. So again, you only have, if you're polarized to M1, you only have an inflammatory response. You don't have any anti-inflammatory response. And they use that against us. This is why everyone looks like this, okay? They're using it against us. We don't have an anti-inflammatory response. And this gets worse even by stuff that we eat, which that's a whole nother video. All interactions are micro, though, not macro. So this doesn't necessarily happen everywhere. It's sort of a system that they're setting up in order to try to take it macro, but it's always micro. Okay? All right. So what is the fort? What does it look like? Can we test it? Can we measure it? Yes, which is great. The bacterial hijack, it doesn't resemble cancer, it just is cancer. It just depends on where the cell is, what the structure is, what the membrane types are. It's all the same stuff. Depending on the type of cell, it could be cancer. The cellular pathology of autism resembles cancer. If you don't believe me, look up what white blood cells do in autism. The cellular pathology of RA resembles cancer. Look that up. The cellular pathology of hair loss resembles cancer. Look that up. The cellular pathology of tooth decay resembles cancer. Cancer is bacterial infection, and bacterial infection is cancer. So hopefully, there's lots of evidence for that. Again, happy to argue that with you, PhD guy or MD guy or ad nauseum. Lots of evidence for that, and I will kick your butt if you try to argue that with me, believe me. But point of this is that this all looks the same. So this bacterial hijack all looks like cancer, and cancer looks like the bacterial hijack because it's all the same stuff. It's a weakening of our immune system. It's sort of an infection by some kind of bacteria. It's a setup of the fort. They do their thing. And, if our immune system isn't strong enough, it gets bigger and bigger and worse and worse. If our immune system is strong enough, we can fight it back. But if we get sick with something else, it's going to happen again. This is also why these things cycle, right? So if you're a woman and you have endometriosis or something like that, it's way worse at certain times of the month. If you have Epstein-Barr, if you have HPV, if you have, any of this stuff, right? It's going to be way worse at certain times of the day and certain times of the month because it cycles. It's circadian. So this whole thing, this whole cancer thing, this tell, if you will, is something called the Warburg Effect. And again, it's consistent with bacterial invasion. It's consistent with this hijack that I'm talking about. If you don't believe me, go look it up. It's consistent with cancer. It is not normal. And this is the biggest thing. It's not like normal. It's not how your cells want to run. Your cells only run in Warburg in very specific, and this is without the bacterial hijack or cancer. So they will run in Warburg, but only in very specific instances. And it's only when your cells are proliferating or growing. So like when you're making new, let's say you have a cellular situation where you have some cells that are, need oxygen and you got to get oxygen to them, well, your blood vessels are going to grow and expand out to that area in order to get blood, to get oxygen to that area. When you're doing that rapid growth, cells will go in Warburg because they have to do it really, really fast. They don't care if they need oxygen or not. They're just going to wham, grow, right? So that is Warburg. But bacterial hijack and cancer, all those cells that are associated with that pathogenesis get stuck in Warburg, and that is abnormal. Even in the presence of fats and oxygen, they stay in Warburg. That's not normal, okay? It's consistent with cancer, but it's also consistent with this bacterial hijack. If you look at what happens in autism with white blood cells, it's the same stuff. RA, it's the same stuff. Almost every disease, it's the same stuff, okay? So this requires, though, a tremendous amount of energy, the Warburg effect. It is inefficient. It is stuck in glucose, but with even more energetic constraints, okay? It is energetically demanding, minimally. So consider this. And these altered cells, by the way, they eat glucose, and they also eat amino acids, okay? So you've heard, cancer cells eat sugar. Well, a bacterial infection eats sugar, okay? Cancer cells also eat amino acids. And a bacterial infection will eat amino acids. What do you think that does to your resources? Can you run your body without amino acids? No, because you can't make proteins. Again, you make proteins to do all kinds of stuff, to run your body and to manage and manage stresses and do all kinds of stuff. And if you can't make protein, you're going to suffer in some way, right? And again, if your bacterial infection or your cancer is eating all your glucose and your aminos, you're going to have other unintended consequences. Let's say they're not even associated with that because you don't have the resources that you need. So again, these little bugs want to take us over, right? They want to really control us, and they all want to metastasize. So it doesn't really matter if you're talking about RA, if you're talking about cancer, if you're talking about autism, if you're talking about muscular dystrophy. It doesn't really matter what the symptoms of the disease are. The underlying cause is always this bacterial hijack. This even applies to aging. You know, again, every cell is always striving toward perfect. Should we age? What causes aging? Bacterial hijack. So even if you're not sick, you have this. We all have this, okay? You want me to go back to here, I'll show you, because everyone looks like this, okay? We all have this. We all have this to one degree or another. So this is and again, the hijack will metastasize. And once it gets into our bone, once it begins to alter our stem cells, once it, sort of gets in rhythm with our circadian, it's very hard to break this bacterial hijack. And again, we're going to have it. It just might manifest in different symptoms at different times. But this really has to do with our immune system, and this is how we defend ourselves. But just like cancer, all bacterial infections want to metastasize. Metastasis happens by LPS, because LPS got to knock down basically get your immune system so confused that I can move around. And other PAMPs are just other funguses and stuff, use stuff other than LPS, but it's all basically the same stuff, via chronic inflammation. This means from their first fort and building secondary forts. So what they want to do is set up a home, set up a fort, and then be able to move around, right? So I'm going to move to a different organ system, or I'm going to move to a different lymphatic system, or whatever it is. This could be different organs depending on the bacteria, different systems. It just sort of depends on the bacteria and you. This could be more deadly depending on the bacteria and the state of your health, okay? So again, stuff that we think of as super bad and deadly, like tuberculosis, let's say, I see in people all the time. Again, it's more about your immune system and, this metastasis and sort of being able to fight back this attempt at metastasis by these pathogens. And again, it's all kind of rooted in stem cells in the bone. So how prevalent is this hijack? Well, again, why do we age? Every cell inside of us is always striving toward perfect, so why do we age? Nothing really ever wears out inside of us, and if it does, it'll just rebuild itself and build a new perfect version, right? We're capable always of creating a new copy of ourselves. We age because of this bacterial hijack. We all have it. Everyone on Earth right now has this, and in some, it's just more metastasized than in others. When our immune system is weak, this metastasis will begin to happen, and it will happen more and more. It's like a war almost inside of us all the time with our kind of immune system and this metastasis trying to gain more and more ground. And the bacterial hijack is absolutely responsible for most disease. All right, so if you look at this graph over on the right, this is just about mitochondrial dysfunction. And an elephant down there on the right has more ways to protect itself. They have, let's say, more P53-like things than we do. And they live a lot longer than we do because they can defend themselves against this bacterial hijack a lot more readily than we can, okay? A lot more readily. Now, can we defend ourselves against this? Yes. And I don't mean to offend anyone, but we are all stupid, lazy, unconcerned, and sluggish when it comes to understanding this and defending ourselves, okay? Because, and it's all about just understanding God's natural system, but it's not a pill, it's several different things. It's understanding kind of how we work and our immune system works, and understanding kind of the tools that are all around us all the time, and then using those tools. Okay, so if you think about it, let's talk in a frame of cancer. So if you look at a scale, right? So some scales, and let's say cancer, it's weighty and heavy. It's going to tip scales, and it again, it's going to win. You know, it's going to begin to win. We're going to begin to die if we have cancer. Well, how do we fight against it? Well, chemo is a pretty weighty pill, so it might, do something, or radiation or whatever. But again, if we start intermittent fasting, that's going to tip the scale. If we understand what to eat and what our bodies need to eat when we have cancer, and start eating that, in our fasting window or outside of our fasting window, we're going to tip the scales. If we start exercising and giving our body what it needs exercising wise, we're going to tip the scales. If we understand what supplements we can take that get in the middle of this bacterial hijack, we're going to tip the scales. And then if we throw in a major effector like a chemo, or like a radiation, or like a THC, or like a fenbendazole, it's game over, okay? So that's what we're talking about. But we need to understand how we work, and we need to understand all these scale tippers in this God system of medicine over here that will tip the scale. And it's not just here, take this pill. It doesn't work. And I'm talking, you could put cancer over here on this, but this is all disease. If you're suffering from a disease, it doesn't really matter what it is. These principles work. And in God's system of medicine, we should be like this all the time. Cancer might come along, but it ain't going to get us. COVID might come along, it ain't going to get us. Other things might come along, and they ain't going to get us. So breaking the hijack is another thing, but sort of defending against our ability to become weak and sort of get sicker from this, we got that figured, okay? God gave us an immune system, but we must get past our own idiocy and ignorance. We got to wake up and understand the importance and gravity of this situation. So here's some examples. The act of eating effectively turns off our immune system for 5 hours. That's pretty important to know. Why is it pharma teaching about us this? Why does the medical system teach us about this? Again, because their system serves themselves. It serves their profits, their money. This is God's system. Again, when you eat, you turn off your immune system for 5 hours. You need to know that in order to defend yourself. Another example, not eating the right amino acids results in an altered immune status. You can't defend yourself if you don't eat the right stuff. Not being in the sun. And I spell that in the Jesus way, but it's the physical representation of the sun for at least 2 hours alters your immune status. You can't be as strong. Dietary sugars make us super weak and vulnerable. Where is this talked about in the pharma system, in the medical system? You have to go to the internet and it's gobbledygook about all of this. You can find good information, but it's mostly gobbledygook. Again, there's a narrative that's fed to you. Hopefully you're waking up to this. You're chaos and confused in order to make your immune system weak, to make you a profit center. That's the truth. What can you do? You can understand God's system of natural medicine. You can understand what nature has built for you, what's out there. Understand how you work. What does every single religion tell us to do in order to improve our spirituality, but probably for our physical health as well? Fast. Now, I'm not saying go on a 7-day or 40-day fast. I'm just saying intermittent fast. We can all start there. That's, you'll find that's hard enough to do, but that's a big tool. Listen, if you eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you effectively have maybe 4 hours of immune response in the evening when you're asleep. You got 5 hours when you eat breakfast, 5 hours when you eat lunch, 5 hours when you eat dinner. Eat a snack before bed, another 5 hours. Maybe 4 hours you have to defend yourself against cancer, to defend yourself against, E. coli. If you can eat in a 4-hour window plus 5, that's 9 hours. You have 15 hours of immune defense and cancer defense and all of that. Fast, intermittent fast. That's why we're saying it's a big tool. I'll take 15 hours of defense over 4. These bacteria are smart. They're good. They know what they're doing. We need to understand that what we eat is a big tool in defending ourselves. I'll give you a quick example. Rosacea. So if you have rosacea has been tied to a lack of manufacturing of a certain protein. Okay? Well, did those cells just wake up one day and say, I don't think I'm going to make that protein today? It's not how it works. It's not how it works at all. If you have the stuff around a cell, the amino acids around a cell to be able to make a protein that cell is trying to make, unless it's some other extenuating circumstance, it's going to make that protein. The main reason that it doesn't make that protein is it doesn't have the stuff it needs. How does it get the stuff it needs? Amino acids. We have to have the right amino acids. So anyway, just understanding, and dietary fats as well, and some fiber. But understanding what to eat is a big tool in defending ourselves. And again, I do lots of videos on that. There's plenty of stuff out there. But good Lord, don't just find your expert that you trust. Even that expert, discern what that expert says. I mean, don't take internet stuff at face value. Don't even take my stuff at face value. Strip the bark off of it. Make sure I'm right. I reference everything, so you can go back through this and look at all the studies I'm looking at that I reference. But, again, pay attention to who you're listening to, too. Understanding God's system of plants and understanding God's system of plants and how they help boost our immune system is a big tool in defending ourselves. Plants help a lot. And again, very early on when I started studying plants, I realized this. God is not so cruel as to create one plant that will sort of cure cancer, right? And you've got to go to South America to find it. That would be a cruelty. That is not how it works. So there are different plants that do different things, but let's say within a square mile of you or 5 square miles of you, you will be able to find a plant to do anything that you need to do to heal or fix yourself. And that's God's system. That's God's system of nature. That's just how God's system works. So here, in Oklahoma, it might be, snake root versus turmeric. And I don't know I haven't even looked at that, but it's going to be, I can't grow turmeric here, but I'm going to have some turmeric-like plant or plant that has properties of turmeric or pieces of turmeric here right around me. And that's just God's system. But anyway, understanding that system and then understanding how to apply that system to the bacterial hijack. How do we defend ourselves against bacteria? How do terpenes help to defend us against bacteria? How do nature provides us with these antibiotics? How does all that work, right? So understanding that system, super duper important. But the biggest tool, the biggest tool is understanding our relationship with that bright, shiny ball in the sky that we see every day called the sun. The sun has so much to do with your immune response, with vitamin D, with how do we defend ourselves, with our ability to not become bacterially hijacked. And it is super important. So all of these things, obviously, we're going to be talking about again and again and again, and where you out with. But I really wanted to lay this down. I think this is super important for science. You know, understanding this bacterial hijack. Again, it's not the genesis of all disease, but it's absolutely the genesis of most disease. And as we begin to understand this, we can break this bacterial hijack. We can understand the pathology of this stem cells in bone. That's a very hard one to break right now. Again, I think it's going to take light to do that. You need 222 nanometers of light. You need our big friend, the shiny ball in the sky called the sun, to really help us become completely disinfected and kind of start from a fresh place. But the science is out there to do this. I mean, this is, you know, well within the realm of possibility. And what happens, you know, when we get past this bacterial infection, this bacterial hijack? How long can we live? What other talents do we have that might turn on? So those are things that mystify me. Those are things that I'm curious about. I hope I've piqued your curiosity. I hope I've educated you some. That's the big point of this. And I hope, you know, I've sparked some interest into research, and, you know, all this stuff needs to be studied. If you want to, you know, hey, I want to make a name for myself as a PhD, gosh, just gave you a lot of ways to do that, my friends. So anyway, have a good one. This is an important one. Hopefully you'll come back to this one in the future. We all will. Love you guys.